Hello, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the Command Line Interface, or CLI, and also step back for a quick history of computer interfaces. We'll see how people first interacted with computers, from human computers to punch cards to the CLI, and eventually the graphical user interface we use today. Let's talk about the Command Line Interface, or CLI. This was actually one of the very first ways people interacted with computers, long before we had windows, icons, and the mouse. Back in the 1960s and 70s, programmers would type commands directly into teletype machines or terminals, and that same idea is still around today. So how do you get to the CLI? On Windows, you can open either Command Prompt or PowerShell. On Mac OS, you just use the terminal app. And if you're on Linux, every distribution comes with a terminal built in. Why do people still use it? Because it's fast, precise, and easy to automate. For example, you can list files with D.I.R on Windows or L.S on Mac and Linux. You move around with C.D, and you can make a new folder with M.K.D.I.R. It might look plain compared to clicking around in a GUI, but don't let that fool you. The CLI is still one of the most powerful tools out there. And honestly, if you're planning to become a software engineer, it's something you really have to know. Here are some examples of command line interfaces. Before keyboards and touchscreens, computers were given instructions in a very different way, through punch cards. A punch card was just a stiff piece of paper with holes punched in specific positions. Each hole represented data or an instruction. Instead of typing code into a computer, programmers would literally punch holes into stacks of cards and feed them into a card reader. This system goes back to the early 1900s, when Herman Hollerith used punch cards for the U.S. Census. Later in the 1950s and 60s, punched cards became the main way to program computers. It wasn't exactly convenient. You had to carry around boxes of cards, and one drop stack could mean hours of resorting. But it was revolutionary at the time because it let people store and reuse programs and data. Eventually, keyboards and terminals replaced punch cards, but they remain an important part of computing history. They remind us how far we've come, from stacks of cards with holes to modern laptops and cloud systems. Before today's electronic computers, the word computer didn't mean a machine. It meant a person. A human computer was someone, usually trained in mathematics, whose job was to perform long, detailed calculations by hand or with the help of mechanical calculators. They worked on things like astronomy charts, engineering tables, or even wartime ballistics. In fact, entire teams of people were employed as computers. For example, at NASA in the 1960s, many women, famously known as the Hidden Figures, worked as human computers, calculating flight paths for rockets and space missions. The work was slow and error-prone, but it was absolutely essential. Eventually, as electronic machines were developed, the term computer shifted from describing people to describing the devices we use today. So when we talk about computers in history, we're really talking about people first, humans who did the computing before machines took over. After the era of human computers, punched cards, and the command line interface came the graphical user interface, or GUI. Instead of typing commands, the GUI allowed people to interact with computers through windows, icons, menus, and a mouse, making computers far more approachable for everyday users. The first well-known GUI was developed at Xerox PARC in the 1970s. Soon after, Apple's Macintosh and Microsoft Windows brought the GUI into homes and offices around the world. Why is this important? The GUI opened up computing to people who weren't programmers. You could point, click, drag, and drop, all things we take for granted today. Although professionals still rely on the command line for speed and precision, it was the GUI that made computers truly mainstream. All right, let's wrap up. On Windows, you have two main options: the old command prompt, also called CMD, and the more modern PowerShell, which is the one we recommend. On Mac OS and on Linux systems like Ubuntu, you'll use the terminal. And before we finish, let's clear up the language. You'll often hear terms like command line, shell, terminal, console, or CLI. They don't all mean exactly the same thing, but in everyday use, people often use them interchangeably to describe working in a text-based interface. The important thing to remember is, no matter what it's called, this is a powerful way to communicate directly with your computer. Before we finish, one more thing. There's a great resource I recommend. A book called Learn Enough Developer Tools to Be Dangerous. It covers 3 essentials every computer science student should master: the command line, a text editor, and Git version control. These are the core skills that will keep coming up in your classes, projects, and future jobs. The good news is it's free on O'Reilly.com if you have access through our library. Or if you prefer, you can buy it directly from the publisher's website. If you work through this book, you'll build a strong foundation that will make everything else in computer science a lot easier. Thank you. This presentation was prepared by June Lee with the assistance of AI technology.